أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So the topic that, given from the topics you guys threw out last month, one of the topics that I thought was really important to talk about first and foremost was the role of a woman in society. And so that means about her going outside of the home. What is the permissibility of that? Given that there is an ayah in the Quran which mentions and for the women to stay in their homes. What about women going out into the workforce? What about women even inside the workforce doing certain jobs that put her in a very high leadership position? A judge. How about a governor? How about the leader of the Muslim Ummah? So all of these questions, interestingly enough, have been discussed and debated by scholars over the last 1,000+ years. So these specific topics have been discussed, and there are various opinions on the topic. But inshallah, we'll go into some of the opinions on it. Now, the first thing to know is for the role of a woman in society, generally speaking, when we're talking about a family unit, husband, wife, and there are children, we know that there are certain responsibilities. The first responsibility for a man that Allah has put upon him, this responsibility upon him, is to financially take care of the family. So that is the burden is on him for the finances. For then, if we are in just a small nuclear family, just mother, father, and child, if the father is out, making money usually, then who would the responsibility of the children most likely fall on? The next adult in the home, which would be the mother. So traditionally, the role of a woman who was married and had children, and that was the amount of people in their family. That was a basic family unit. So the responsibility of the children would come upon her. However, does that mean, and do we see anywhere in the Quran and Sunnah where it says she could not get help, where she could not get help from outside people to help her if she desired to do something else? And we do not see that in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran, where it forbids her from seeking any sort of work or even a hobby outside of the home where she may have to leave her children with other people. And that was even common at the time, that they lived in extended family homes where the mother may leave the children with the grandparents or uncles or aunts. A village raised these children. So it was often that other family members would help out. Especially at that time, women who married were very young. Even men, women and men married at a very young age. So a lot of times these younger girls, they needed the help from their mothers and their family members. So their mothers may help out, the grandmothers would help out, and the women may go out and do other jobs. If they had a farm, husband and wife would tend to their farm, and maybe the grandmother would take care of the children. So this was a common thing, that women had to go out and do things. They had to, whether it was tending to something in their own home or outside of their home, or doing a job outside of their home. So these were things that occurred at that time. Now, there are, like I said, certain specifically Quranic ayat which do forbid women from going outside of the home. And so these are the evidences, and I'll put them out for you, of those who say a woman should not do any of the things that we've mentioned. That she should not leave her home, she should not go and seek work, she should not, and then following, be a judge, be a governor, be anything, be in any type of leadership position, because really her place is the home. And these are the evidences that are used. So these are evidences that scholars have put forth, and we'll look at them and we'll assess them and see what was the response of other scholars to these evidences. So the first one is that she should stay at home because of the ayah in the Quran that says وَقُرْنَ فِي بُيُوتِهُنَّ, and to the women, they should stay in their home. The next is that a woman's voice is her awrah. Awrah meaning it is a part of her nakedness, that it's something that shouldn't be exposed to men. A woman should not speak in front of men. So if she's outside in the workforce doing any of those positions of leadership, then how can she be in that position when her voice should be hidden? The next one is that, okay, if she wants to speak in public, then she should do so from behind a veil, because there is an ayah in the Quran that says, if you ask them, talking about the wives of the Prophet, then ask them, min wara'i hijabin, from behind a veil. So that ayah is there. And then the final one, and this one is also used, is that generally speaking, a woman is fitnah. She is something that men are tempted by. And so if she was outside in the workforce teaching a gathering of men and women, or a judge over men and women, then she would be a disturbance, or she would be a temptation for the men, and this would cause a lot of fitnah, so it's better to keep her out of the public sphere. Okay, so these are the arguments brought forth by those who say, no, a woman should not work, she should not teach in mixed gatherings, she should not be a judge, etc., all of these things. So what we have to do is we accept that these scholars have said that, and we respect their opinion for the ijtihad that they have made, meaning they've done all of their, they know very much about the religion, they've done their studies in tafsir, and they've come to these conclusions. But we can also see what the other scholars said who respectfully disagreed with them. And so it's important always to know two sides of an opinion. If you only go to one side, if you only know one side of the story, then you won't know how to respectfully disagree with it. Or if you only know the other side of the story, you'll think that those who say this opinion, that women should not work, they have no validity. But as we'll see just now, there is validity in both claims, and we'll see where it comes from. And so the main thing this comes down to is Surah Ahzab. Surah Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Ahzab, and there are a certain set of ayat in Surah Ahzab where Allah mentions these things. Number one, He says, it is said in the Quran, it says, okay, do not be soft in speech to men, lest he in whose heart is desire should covet, should like desire and want that. But speak with appropriate speech. So do not talk softly and seductively. So this was a commandment to women. Okay? Number two, and abide in your houses. This is again given in the Surah Ahzab. And then, and when you ask for something, it's saying from them, asking from women, ask them from behind a partition. This is pure for your hearts and their hearts. Okay. So these three ayat, they are mentioned, but it's so important to see what is the context of these ayat. So these are the proofs that are given for the fact that women should not leave the home, should not work, should not do anything but stay in her home. The context of these ayat is actually very clear if you just read what was before and after it. So the beginning of this particular set of ayat begins with, Ya ayyuhan nabi, قُلْ لِأَزْوَاجِكَ, O Prophet, say to your wives. And then the set of ayat come. Okay, so it says, O Prophet, say to your wives, and there's many things that are said in this. Whoever of them should commit a clear immorality, for her the punishment is doublefold. And for any of them who obeys Allah and His Messenger and does righteousness, for her is a double reward. Then it says again, Ya nisa'un nabi, lastunna ka'ahadin minan nisa. O wives of the Prophet, you are not like any among other women. Then it has the ayah. If you fear Allah, do not be soft in speech, lest he in whose heart there is desire may covet it, may desire that. But be appropriate with your speech, and abide in your homes, and do not display yourselves, as was this display of former times of ignorance. These come in Surah Ahzab, ayah 32, 33, a set of ayat. And then it goes on and it goes general, and it's not talking about the wives of the Prophet again. And it starts again in ayah 53, where it says to the Prophet, it's saying to the Sahaba, it's telling them actually, it's just this kind of etiquette. It's telling the Sahabi that, you know what, when you enter the house of the Prophet ﷺ, when you've been invited in and you've been invited for a meal, then when you're invited, enter and eat, but please disperse without seeking lots of conversation, because this behavior troubles the Prophet, but he's shy of dismissing you. And then it says, And when you ask them for something, the women for something, ask from behind a partition. Okay? So we see that from the context of the ayat is very, very clearly talking about the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And even the second one that comes, it's talking about in his home. When you come into his home, don't bother him too much by continuing conversation. He has other things to do. So just leave nicely after you've eaten. And if you need to ask his wives a question, it is better that there's a partition. Like in a home, we've seen this even in some homes where the men and the women folk, they still eat in the same home for like a dawah or a party, but you might have a curtain between the men and the women so that the women can enjoy and eat nicely, don't have to worry about anyone looking at them, and the men would eat without having the women looking at them. And so this was the hijab that was described in this ayah. You can see it directly. You know, it's talking about someone's invited to eat. By the way, when the wives of the Prophet are there and you need to ask them something, then there should be a veil, an actual like covering. Okay, and so we'll look at how the scholars, how the mufassirun, how the people of tafsir interpreted this ayah. There was actually difference of opinion in it. And so we see Imam al-Tabari, Imam al-Qurtubi, they both say that these ayat, though they are for the Prophet ﷺ's wives, they're directed towards them, this is general for all women. And all women must abide by these rules. To stay in your home, that if someone asks you something, it should be behind a veil. If someone's talking to you, it should be behind a partition. And if you speak, speak firmly and don't speak with a soft, seductive voice. Okay? And Ibn Kathir also agrees with this interpretation of At-Tabari. Now we look at other scholars of tafsir who are also renowned scholars of tafsir. We have Ibn Atiyah, Ibn al-Jawzi, Imam al-Razi, al-Nafasi, and Imam al-Sututi. When you look at their understanding or their tafsir of these ayat, they are going along the same, they say it goes along with referring back to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So it was referring to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and they just continue that, yes, this is also referring to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. They don't make any mention that, by the way, this is also general for all other women. And then Ibn Ashur, one of the more contemporary scholars, still from long, long ago, he says specifically, no, these are just for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. There are many rules that were just for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ that weren't for all of women, and this is included in them. For example, men were not allowed to marry the wives of the Prophet ﷺ after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. That was a specific rule for them. That's actually mentioned in these set of ayat. I just didn't read it. Another ruling we just saw, if they commit a sin, it is double sin for them, and if they do something righteous, it is double reward for them. So this is showing the special status of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, that they are of a special status of women that, you know what, there needs to be some extra precautions. That since no one is supposed to marry them after the Prophet ﷺ's death, so when you need to ask them something, don't come directly into their home and require them to cover up and everything. No, just have in the wives of the Prophet ﷺ's home a curtain. So if someone needs to ask a question, they can ask and she can feel comfortable in her area and not have to cover up and everything. And also that there is possibly no fitnah, because no one can ever marry these women, right? And so there was extra precautions put upon the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And it is evident even in the seerah, in the hadith, that you will see that this was upon the Prophet ﷺ's wives specifically, because it even mentions that, for example, after this ayah was revealed, one of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, Sauda, she decides to leave the home to get something. And Umar radiallahu anhu stops her and says, no, the ayah was revealed, you must stay in your home. And she comes back and she's like, wait, she asked the Prophet ﷺ, wait, is that true? Like, I can't come out? He said, no, you may leave for a need. So anyways, it was alleviated for them to a certain extent. When they needed to go out for something they needed to do, then they were allowed to go. But you can see from this hadith specifically, Umar radiallahu anhu was telling Sauda, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ specifically, and not other women. We still see throughout Sirah other women who would go out, going to the masjid regularly, going out in the marketplace regularly, going even in the battlefield and tending to people in the battlefield. So we saw many instances in the Sirah where people who were not the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were able to freely go in and out and do what they need. And so I think you can see from the context of the ayah, as well as the seerah and the history, that it verifies that the women, besides the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, were able to freely go out and about. And we understand that specifically from some of the rulings that exist. So if a woman is divorced or her husband passes away, she's in an iddah. And what does iddah mean? It means she has to stay in her home for 3 or 4 months. So why would that rule exist if she's never even allowed to leave the home at all? It means that you're generally free to go and leave the home, but when you're in your iddah, it is better that you stay at home. So we can see from many evidences that this idea that this should be compulsory upon all women, it's an opinion, and we say we respect that opinion, but the evidences that show that are not for that are against that, they seem to be stronger. That the women were out and about, they were able to leave their homes. As for the voice being awrah, so the ayah doesn't say that a woman's voice is awrah, meaning men should never hear it. It's actually specifically saying, and do not lower your voice in such a way that someone who has desire may have a disease. Someone who has disease in their hearts may desire that person. And so what the scholars have said that means is someone who speaks in like a seductive tone or a seductive manner, or talks very softly, and it may inspire desire in the hearts of men. And so they said, when you speak, just speak with a regular tone, regular voice. Don't try to be soft and seductive in your tone. And so does that mean that her voice is awrah? There's no way to get from that the voice is awrah. But another hadith that is used for that is, evidence for that a woman's voice is awrah, is that when in prayer, when an imam makes a mistake, it is said that the men may correct the man with his voice, but the women should clap, right? If they hear something incorrect by the imam, or he's messed up the ruku or something. So they use that evidence that, because she has to clap in prayer, so that means her voice is awrah, that she shouldn't say anything in prayer. But as a general rule in fiqh, things that are related to worship and ibadah, they have a very specific ruling, and you can't take something from the area of ibadah and do qiyas or analogy of it to other parts of life. Because ibadah is very specific. Allah sent down very specific rules for ibadah, and we say that those are rigid. Like you have to have evidence to do those things. If you don't have evidence to do one of those things, then you can't. So there's not a lot of wiggle room in ibadah. And so a general rule that scholars agree upon is that you can't do analogy from something in ibadah and bring it to regular acts of life. In addition, we have so many examples where the women spoke to the Prophet ﷺ, they asked him questions. That would mean their voice was not awrah, they could ask questions. Even in the khutbah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a woman stood up and challenged him about what he had said about the mahar. So if any of those women's voices were awrah, and of course that woman would have spoken up and had to speak loudly, right? If any of those women's voice was awrah, or it shouldn't have been spoken out in front of men, then they would have been rebuked at that time. Oh, why did you speak? You're a woman and I'm a man, you shouldn't have spoken in front of me. So even this argument that the woman's voice is awrah, there's more strong evidence that it wasn't awrah. Women came directly to the Prophet ﷺ, asked questions. Women were a part of discussions and conversations that happened in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. He may ask a question to his congregation, the women would answer the question in front of men. As for if the behind the veil, that was, like I said, that was specifically, if we go with the opinion that it was specifically for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, then we say that is not supposed to be put upon other women. If other women desire to do that, that's fine. If you want to put a partition between you and others when you're in your home, between the men and the women, that's fine, that's good, and that's noble. But it is also not a requirement. That was a requirement for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ in their homes. And so other people put this upon even general gatherings, and I've seen this myself in the country I come from is South Africa. And so I've seen once in an all-women's school that there was one portion of the room, like imagine the corner of the room, it had a little chair, and then it had a curtain all over all over that corner. So it was like the teacher would, so I asked, what is this station right here? They said this is the station for when the male speaker comes or the male teacher comes to address the women. So they would put a curtain all over the male teacher. And so this is taking directly from the ayah, but it's not in the place where it was meant to be. It was in the home of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So it is. We don't say there's something wrong with that, but that is something that is beyond what is necessary. And so if someone were to take the curtain off and the male teacher spoke to the women, there would be absolutely nothing wrong with that, because the Prophet ﷺ himself gathered the women and spoke to them on a weekly basis. He gave the women a weekly halaqah where he directly was speaking to them, just as I'm directly speaking to you. And so when people take those ayat and take it sort of out of context, you can see where it can sort of make people understand that perhaps that is the norm, that is what is supposed to be done. And if I quoted you the ayah, you'd say, oh yeah, it's pretty obvious that if you ask a question, ask from behind a veil. But what was the context of the ayah? Who was it regarding? Who was the audience? And who was the intended person that it was talking to? As for the idea that, well, a woman is just fitnah in and of herself, if she was at work working with men, or she is a teacher teaching in front of men, or a judge or a leader in any position, she is generally a fitnah, and so let's just avoid that altogether. Now the idea is, and this is an opinion of scholars, and it still exists today. Ibn Farhun, for example, one of the scholars of the past, said, a woman cannot be a judge because her face and her body may be a fitna, and she cannot be in a place where men may see her or hear her. As for that opinion, we say that in the Quran, what does it say? Who does lowering the gaze refer to? When it says in the Quran for people to lower their gaze, who is it referring to? It says to the believing men to lower their gaze, and then right after it, and it says to the believing women to lower their gaze. And so it says actually to both men and to women to lower their gaze. And when scholars go deeper into this, they say this is at the point when someone feels desire for another person, when they look at them, there is lust or there is desire, then that's when one should lower their gaze. Because even if a female student is looking at a male teacher, and that male teacher is very handsome, should she just keep staring and looking and just like awe-inspired? No, she should follow the ayah and lower her gaze. The same way, if a male is talking to a female, or a male has a female teacher in front of him, if he has desire and there is lust or shahwa in his heart, at that point he should follow the ayah as well and lower his gaze. So it doesn't say women should only lower their gaze to men, or men only lower their gaze to women. It's a two-way street. That if you have desire for the person you are looking at, then it is better to lower your gaze. Secondly, there's actually a hadith, a really interesting story in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where there was a woman, a beautiful woman. She was wearing hijab, and she comes up to the Prophet ﷺ to ask a question. And the person narrating the hadith, a male who's narrating the hadith, he actually sort of describes her face, and he's describing the beauty of her face. So one, we see that she was talking to the Prophet ﷺ, and she had her face open, so she was able to show her face, and her hijab was on. And thirdly, there was a man with the Prophet ﷺ, a younger Sahabi with him, who was looking at this woman. He's just the Prophet ﷺ and the woman are talking, and there's a man, Al-Fadl, standing beside the Prophet ﷺ. And this man is just mesmerized by the beauty of this woman. He's just looking at her, there's a twinkle in his eye, and he's staring at this woman because she was said to be a beautiful woman. The Prophet ﷺ, he senses something strange, and he looks at Al-Fadl's face, and he's just looking at him. He's just looking at him, look at her. And all of a sudden the Prophet ﷺ, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say to the woman, you're too beautiful and you shouldn't be here, this is inappropriate. Why are you talking to me when men are around? He simply looked at Al-Fadl, he took his chin, and he just moved it slightly to the side. And then they continued their conversation. He didn't even need to tell Al-Fadl, he didn't want to embarrass him to the point where he's like, what are you doing? Why are you staring? Lower your gaze. He just took his finger and moved it to the side and continued his conversation, which is going accordance exactly with what the ayah says. and what the scholars interpreted, if there is desire, if there is lust, if someone if you're looking at someone of the opposite gender and there is so much desire in your heart, then to save yourself and protect yourself from that, rather from something worse happening, rather just lower your gaze and look away. Did he ever rebuke that woman for what she did, which was simply talking and asking a question or looking beautiful at the end of the day? No, he didn't rebuke the woman. At the end of the day, he simply, in a kind way, had the man lower his gaze. There is ayat in the Quran, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he did say that women are, for men, the greatest fitnah that was left behind for them were women. So at the end of the day, does fitnah mean something is evil? If something is a fitnah, is it evil? I'll give you an example from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, money and children are a fitnah for you. Allah says to us, telling us as mankind, money and children are a fitnah for you. Is money evil in and of itself? Are our children evil in and of themselves? No. So fitnah doesn't mean it is something that is evil. Fitnah means it's something you're going to struggle with. It's going to be a trial that you struggle with. And so money can be a trial for someone trying to get money. Someone who's always poor trying to get money. Someone who's very rich, what do they do with that money? Children, the struggle of bringing up good, righteous children, or children who are not good to you and rude to you. So the struggle of trying to deal with your children. Just because it's labeled a fitna in our religion doesn't mean it's an evil thing by nature. And so people who quote this hadith of Prophet ﷺ saying women are fitna, so erase them from society. If that were the case, then we would erase money and children from society. Something being a fitna doesn't mean we just pretend it doesn't exist and tuck it away. It means that Allah and the Prophet ﷺ were telling us, pay attention to these things, to these struggles that you may have with these specific things. So for men, it is innate and natural, and psychology will prove that to us. It is innate and natural for them to desire women. For many men, to desire women, and that when they look at a beautiful woman, it makes them, starstruck, just as Al-Fadl was. He was just struck by the beauty of this woman. So the Prophet ﷺ is warning them to pay attention to that and to protect your heart from that. Did it say protect them by hiding them away? No. It's saying to the men, protect your hearts and make yourself more aware that is a bigger struggle that you're going to have. And so the onus is on the men in that case. This is something I've warned you about, so be just more careful how you interact with women. How much you stare at women that you have desire for. Don't do it. Lower your gaze, even though you may be struck by it. So these are the majority of what the main evidences that are brought forth for the general topic of women being outside in public, working in different kinds of environments. There's 2 leadership positions which across the board consensus is that she cannot do, which is being the imam of men and women. So she's allowed to be an imam if there are only women in that gathering. So meaning she's the leader of the prayer if there are women in that gathering. It's a difference of opinion between different madhahib, but in some madhahib, in some schools of thought, she can lead the prayer if there are only women. But she cannot be an imam when men are behind her, and she cannot be the khalifa of the entire ummah. And for her not being an imam, again, that goes back to that category of ibadah. We said when it is ritual ibadah that Allah has given us very specific details about it, then you cannot do anything unless there is precedence, unless you have evidence for it. There is no evidence whatsoever that a woman is allowed to lead a prayer in front of with men and women both in the gathering. And so we say we don't deviate from that. That is an act of ibadah, and we don't deviate from that. And again, that was a legal maxim or a qaida that the scholars had derived from looking at all of Islamic law, that al-aslu fil ibadat at-tawaqquf. The default in rulings of ibadat is to stop. You do not do anything more or less than what is specifically and clearly written in the Quran and Sunnah. As for other matters that are not related to ibadat, and we call that mu'amalat, all other types of interactions, that is where there is this flexibility and ability to do ijtihad. So a woman in the workplace, it's not related to ibadah, so scholars can come with their interpretations of it. That's why we see there are two Their ijtihad comes to two conclusions. No, she cannot work where there are men because she's a fitnah and because she should be behind a veil, etc. And yes, she can, because at the end of the day, they believe that those were specific rules for the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. And then in terms of judge and leadership position and governor, all of those have ikhtilaf. They have differences of opinion from the scholars because it's not a matter of ibadah, so the scholars can do ijtihad and come to their own conclusion. Okay, so we had initially spoken about the main argument against why women should not even be in the public sphere at all. Was her voice is awrah, she is a fitnah, she should be behind a veil, and that, and I forget what the last one was. Can someone remind me? And that she should stay at home, generally. And so what we want to see is, we'll go through each question. Number one, can she work? And what is the evidences? Can she be a teacher in front of a mixed gathering? And can she participate in politics? So we'll go over them very quickly. Number one, can she work? Based on everything that we've said, of course there will be two answers, right? One is no for all the evidences given, and the other is yes, as long as she's following the correct Islamic etiquette. At the end of the day, Allah gave us so many rules and advices and explanations of how we should live our lives, even to the point of how should we dress, how should we talk, how should we interact with one another. So if someone is following to the best of their ability those actions, and she's following that correct adab and etiquette, then that means that there should be nothing wrong with her going out in society, because she's followed everything that Allah has told her to do, and so now she should be protected and free to go out in society, and she shouldn't be put to the back and said, well, no, you are a fitnah, so you should stay to the back. No, she's dressing appropriately, she's speaking in the appropriate way, she's not making her voice seductive. So if she follows all these rules, then she is following the track where Allah allows her to go outside into the workforce. In the workforce, for example, we have so many examples from the seerah. We mentioned some last month, but I'll mention them again, and with the evidences, because I know some of you asked for the evidences last time. So there were at least two women mentioned in Ibn Hajar's, Ibn Hajar is the one who commented on Sahih al-Bukhari, Fath al-Bari. He says there were at least two women who made and sold perfumes in the marketplace. So they were business women. The Prophet's wife, Zainab, actually sewed and embroidered items, and she sold this in the marketplace. This is from Sahih Muslim. We have Shuraik, who ran her own guest house. So people would come, and she had her own bed and breakfast, you could say. This is in Sahih Bukhari. The Prophet's mimbar, the mimbar where you lead the khutbah, you say the khutbah you deliver the khutbah. The Prophet ﷺ had the mimbar made by a woman's carpentry business. So a woman from the Ansar had a carpentry business, she had it made for him. This is in Sahih Bukhari. The wife of Ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, was very poor. His wife worked and supported him and their family. This is in Imam Ahmad's hadith book. We have a woman named Bishr who owned and tended to her own date tree farm. This is in Sahih Muslim. There was a woman who used to make food and serve it to the men and women after Jummah. They'd look forward to come and eat the food of this woman after Jummah. This is in Sahih Bukhari. There was two women who were made the police officers in Mecca and Medina. This is Umar radiallahu anhu appointed a shifa in Medina to be the police officer of the market. That she was so qualified to do her job, that she knew business transactions the best, she knew the sharia of business transactions, that she was, they even described her as, that she would come with her whip in her hand and she would enforce the good and forbid the evil. This was men and women who she was telling, no, you're doing this wrong, that's cheating, you're doing bribery there, etc. She knew the rules of the marketplace. And there were women who went and tended to men on the battlefield. Number two, can she teach in the dawah? Can she teach in front of men and women? Again, there would be two opinions. No, given everything that the scholars have said. And yes, again, as long as she's following the correct Islamic etiquette. Aisha radiallahu anha was the muftiyah of Medina. She was one of the most knowledgeable of women in Medina. When men had questions and they couldn't answer, they'd ask other sahabi and they couldn't get the answer, they'd come to Aisha radiallahu anha and she would give the answer to them. Yes, she was min wara'i hijab, and she was behind a veil because that was the ruling that was put upon her as the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. But we have many other examples, specifically in the golden age of Islam, in the first era after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, in the times of the Tabi'een. So these are the predecessors to the Sahaba. It says that Imam al-Haythami, in his book Majma' al-Zawaid, he says, that was about Samra, the police officer. He's the one who said she had a whip in her hand and she would discipline the people. But it is mentioned in the 7th century that there was a woman, Darda, as-Sughra ad-Dimishkiya. She lived in Syria, in Damascus. She was a prominent female scholar who would teach the lessons in the male section of the masjid, and she would teach to both men and women. And prominent scholars attended her durus. Even one of the teachers of hadith to Imam al-Shafi'i himself was Nafisa bint al-Hasan, a female teacher of hadith. So she had memorized and gotten a chain of she had a chain back to the Prophet ﷺ of hadith that she had learned. He would come to her to learn a hadith. It's also mentioned that Ibn Hajar, who we mentioned, who wrote the commentary on Fath al-Bari, he had studied under 53 female scholars. And Ibn Asakir al-Damashqi took from at least 80 female narrators of hadith. So these are many examples where these women were teaching gatherings of men or even individual students, and these students came up to be some of the most prominent scholars of our ummah. And so there was a time where female scholarship was great and it was flourishing, and just because society and culture has changed the way that we see female scholarship doesn't mean that it was not allowed at that time. That there were women who were able to teach in front of men and women, and it wasn't about her gender that they cared, it was about the knowledge that she had. It was she qualified to teach them or not. And we sort of see the hypocrisy in our society today. For example, if you had a lecturer coming in your regular university, say it was like some PhD in biology and her name was Mrs. Smith. Like both the male and female students would be so excited to see her because, I'm so excited to learn what she has to say about so-and-so topic. But the moment that a female teacher who wants to teach Islamic studies comes in front of a gathering of men and women, what did everyone say? Not appropriate? Well, is she really qualified? Or why does she have to teach this? Why does she have to teach this? Why can't we just get a man to teach this? And so we have hypocrisy even when we look at our society. We say in a secular environment, we're totally fine with it. But in Islamic environment, no, women should not touch this science. But at the time, very soon after the Prophet ﷺ's time, in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th century, there were so many women scholars who then made the scholars that we know today that are so prominent. The next one is a judge. The judge is there's a big ikhtilaf on the issue, but interestingly enough, the Hanafi madhab, some Malikiyya and some Shafi'iyya, as well as Ibn Jarir al-Tabari and Hasan al-Basri, they say that a woman can be a judge. And if you think of judge, this is a very high position of leadership, of authority. You are a judge in a court of Sharia law, where you are judging between this man and this man, or that man and that man. You are making a judgment call. You are essentially being, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was alive, he was the judge between people, right? And so it was allowed in the Hanafi madhab and among some scholars that agreed that it was fine for her to be a judge. The reason that people said she was not allowed to be was all the things mentioned above. In addition to that, a few more evidences. Number one, like ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa. There's an ayah in the Quran that says the men are the caretakers, or they are the ones who are supposed to be responsible over women. So how can then a woman be responsible over men in the courthouse? And so the rad, or the response to that, is that ayah is very specifically for the family, for the husband and wife household, that the man is the maintainer of the women and even the household. He is the one responsible for them. Again, we mentioned that. He is the one who's financially responsible to take care of the family. And so you can't take analogy from one situation to another. Because the husband is the authority or the responsible person in a home, does that mean in every situation a man is always authority over women? No. And so the scholars debated this. Some said yes, others said no. There's no parallel between those two topics. The next thing they said is For example, the Prophet ﷺ never chose a female judge. If there were allowed to be female judges, he would have chosen one at that time. Well, the scholars of fiqh have come up with an understanding that the things that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do doesn't mean that it's not allowed, right? The Prophet ﷺ didn't do many things that we allow today. Like we drive cars. The Prophet ﷺ didn't drive a car. We have separation in our masjid, right? Prophet ﷺ didn't do that. Does that mean it makes those things haram? No, this requires a big framework of how to understand fiqh and how rules are made. But something the Prophet ﷺ didn't do doesn't make it haram. Again, we can't make something haram unless we have clear-cut evidence. It's a very something that we should really understand, that a scholar, or even for us, at the end of the day, it's usually lay people who make things halal and haram just however we feel. It is like you are saying that Allah says this. When you say something is haram, it is like you're saying, to the best of my knowledge, Allah is saying this is haram. You're speaking on behalf of the Prophet ﷺ and Allah. And it is not for us, for people who do not have knowledge on certain issues, to make something haram when there is not sufficient evidence for that. So that is why there's a minority of the scholars, including the Hanafiya, some Malikiya, who allow a woman to be judged because they said there's just not enough evidence to disallow it. And then finally, in politics, it is basically agreed upon that a woman in a leadership position, if you take two positions. One, she obviously can't be in any leadership position because of all the reasons we've mentioned. Or, yes, she can be in a leadership position because as long as she follows the correct Islamic etiquette. And so it is agreed amongst those who allow her that any type of leadership, like she's a leadership in a Masjid Shura board, or she's the head of the treasury or the education minister or something like that, they all agree that there is nothing wrong with that. As for someone like head of state, then there's a lot of difference of opinion. As for Khalifa, there's a consensus that she cannot be the Khalifa, and they equate that similarly to the Imam. The Imam is the head, he leads the people in prayer, he gives the khutbah, and that was the role of many a Khalifa, that they would lead the people in prayer. He was the spiritual as well as political leader. And so since the Khalifa is both spiritual and political leader, and the Imam is the spiritual leader, so she can't be the Khalifa or Imam. But for president of a country, governor of a country, they do have difference of opinion. One says that she can, and others say that she can't. At the end of the day, those who say she cannot, it goes back to the story where the Prophet ﷺ said that the woman who is the leader of Persia, that no people will ever succeed if a woman is their leader. So some take that specifically, that the Prophet ﷺ was talking about her as a woman, and her nation was not going to succeed because of her. And so then it's not generalized to all of women. Others say, no, it is generalized so that all women should not be at least head of state. That any state that is ruled by like a country that is ruled by a woman should not be allowed. So they come through at the end of the day with differences of opinion. And we've seen in many instances where we have had female presidents or prime ministers, but it is something with a lot of difference of opinion. At the end of the day, it's something we can discuss even in further if you'd like to. I'd like to conclude with that. At the end of the day, you see there's a lot of differences of opinion on the matters, but I'd say that differences of opinion, what we'll learn is they are a rahmah for us. Knowing that there are different ways that scholars interpreted things, they are a rahmah for us. It is a mercy for us, because as generations and people and societies and places change, then we do need this ability for certain circumstances to take rules that fit that time. And when you see that the scholars already had that in mind, that we can't just base it based on how I think here in 7th century Makkah. They realized that they had to be more open-minded, and they gave rulings based on what they understood was going to be something that makes sense for all of time. And so that's why we'll see some scholars who are more lenient on these things, even from 7-8 centuries ago, because when they couldn't see something that made something haram altogether, they're like, we can't say it's haram. We can't find enough evidence that says it's haram, even though in my culture, in my tradition, in this time, in the 7th century of the world, it really seems like women would not be a judge. Even the ruling that women could be a judge, it was a hypothetical thing they spoke about because it hadn't even occurred. When the Hanafi madhab talked about it, it hadn't even occurred. But they said, you know what, hypothetically, if in the future there's someone who is a female who knows the Sharia and she knows the law well enough, and there is not a man that is, able to take that position, why not? Why not let that woman, because she is qualified? So they even thought in hypotheticals, and we make dua that Allah gives them mercy and rahmah, and really gives barakah to them for what they have done for us in this day and age. So jazakumullahu khairan, and I'll open it up now to further questions. So for medical reasons, because medical procedures and medical checkups are a necessity at the end of the day. So when there is necessity, when there is darura, then general rules sort of get tossed aside. And so we say that if someone goes to the doctor and there's a male goes to a female doctor and is inspected by the female doctor, that is acceptable, and vice versa. If you have a choice, it's better too, and I think we just feel more comfortable, a female going to a female, male going to a male. But does a female Muslim doctor have that choice? She doesn't have a choice to say, no, I only want female patients, don't let the male patients come to me, no. And we have the example, the Prophet ﷺ mentions that the women were on the battlefield tending to the wounded soldiers. So the women who are not related to these men were tending to their wounds. So in a time of necessity, which mostly all of medicine is a necessity, people's health is a necessity, so we say, the scholars agree that it is acceptable. If you have a choice, it's better for you to see the same gender. But if you don't have a choice, then it is acceptable. Scholars have agreed that it is acceptable.